My name is Cecilia Olson, and this is my Communications 101 informative speech on Twitter and journalism for instructor Shannon Proctor, and here's my audience. Growing up, do you remember your parents sitting at the breakfast table, reading the newspaper every morning? Or maybe when your dad would drive you to school, he would turn on AM radio and listen to what they were saying about the local sports teams. Or maybe at night, after dinner, when the dishes and all the chores were done, your mom would turn on Channel 5 to hear the nightly news broadcast. Notice I said, do you remember? Because all these things are becoming dated and generational. With today's the digital age, younger and more tech-savvy folk do not wait for or even seek the news. They find it in their social media news feeds. And with its brevity and speed, Twitter has become a podium for easily conducting and consuming journalism. Twitter started as a microblogging social media site, but it has become an internet tool that has become helpful and even essential to some in reporting and sourcing the news. With its 140-character tweet limit, it's great for providing brief and instant updates regarding events. It's also become a more useful tool in investigative and journalistic reporting. Earlier this year, you'll remember on April 15th, the Boston Marathon was interrupted by tragic double bombings. With the primary focus on victims and the chaos and tragedy that ensued, suspects were not immediately identified. However, when the FBI did have photos of Suspect 1 and Suspect 2, as they were known at the time, they pleaded with the public in helping to identify these people. The photos were tweeted and retweeted and eventually seen by millions of people across the nation. Participants and spectators of the marathon began going through all of their footage and recordings of that day. And when the last living suspect was finally caught after a dramatic shootout, the Boston PD sent a tweet notifying the world of his capture. It wasn't a news conference, and it wasn't a press release. Alternatively, the Arab world is going through a major upheaval, what is known as the Arab Spring. NPR's Andy Carvin read through thousands of play-by-play tweets. Through his reputation with NPR, he created a community on Twitter that aided in dissecting and translating these tweets and footage of what was going on with the Arab world. He was able to write an informative and unflinching report of these events that otherwise might not have been covered or distributed globally. Andy Carvin might not have written that book or have the credibility that he does without his Twitter followers. Similarly, journalists are more easily finding sources with Twitter. As Lynn Grushing-Popel said in the Washington State Journal, Twitter is helping to afford journalists an opportunity to identify and connect with sources and to learn about potential stories as they're occurring in ways that were never before possible. In the past, journalists had to do more literal footwork to find topics and get sources, but now that has been simplified with the wide net they are able to cast through using Twitter. As earlier stated, Andy Carvin had a community of followers on Twitter. Journalists can now create a network regardless of their geographical location to help enrich their stories. They can tweet a question to their followers and begin to do research based on the responses they receive. They can initiate conversations with professionals in different industries that before might not have been possible with the digital age, where their background was not immediately available to these people, and they may or may not have received a return phone call. Or, in some cases, the story comes from the Twitter followers, the Twitter users. They provide the story to the reporters, as was with U.S. Airways Flight 1549 when it crashed into the Hudson River. Janice Crumbs of Sarasota, Florida, was the first person to tweet any picture of the plane crashing into the river. And within a half an hour, MSNBC was interviewing Janice as an eyewitness of the event. Newspapers became endangered with the rise and popularity of digital media, and people became concerned with how journalism would be affected. And though Twitter has its limitations, it has proven to be an effective tool and shown to be a positive evolution of journalism thus far. Thank you.